Hi there, guys, and welcome to this latest edition of the Wise Crypto Sunday Special with me, your host, Chris Coney. And my guest analyst this week is the lovely Maria Matic. Maria, nice to have you back.
Thank you, Chris. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you as well. So today, hot topic. I've called it Bitcoin and geopolitics, but really, it's coming off the back of this news about El Salvador. So, do you want to start us off by giving us an overview of what exactly has happened there?
Well, the most important thing that happened is that Bitcoin got accepted as legal tender in El Salvador, now even by their legislator body, which is a historic moment in the history of cryptocurrencies. This is the first time that one country has accepted Bitcoin as a legal tender, which means that it's now on par with their other with the dollar, since dollar has been El Salvador's national currency from 2001, I think, when they replaced Colon because it was debased and inflationary and everything due to political turmoils and wars and the problems that El Salvador was going through. So yeah, it's a quite important moment in the history.
Okay, so they were using the dollar as their national currency, right? So as far as I understand it, because it's legal tender, all the merchants in the country now have to accept Bitcoin as payment, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure if they have to, but they can. Maybe they have to, but I know that now the prices can be denominated in Bitcoin and shown in Bitcoin as well, and there is no capital gain tax to be paid on Bitcoin. So these are the things that we, at the moment, that we know.
Sure. I think it's mandatory.
It's mandatory,
Yeah,
okay?
it's mandatory. So what the president was saying was that the government's going to back the volatility, though. So even though if you're a merchant and you accept the Bitcoin, the government isn't going to force you to hold it and then the price fluctuate. You can sell it on the open market as you normally would, and if not, the government will buy it off you and give you dollars.
Oh,
So
okay. I haven't
yeah,
seen that
that's how
speech.
the
Okay,
government's going to get their own reserves. Is they're going to buy it off their citizens if they don't want to keep it.
that's
It's
very
interesting.
interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, so the what was the cologne, was it? There's the national currency of El Salvador
Yeah.
up until about 2001, and then it went on the dollar. And well, the biggest problem with what's the biggest problem with them using the dollar as a currency? You got any thoughts on that?
Well, if you're using a dollar as your currency, you cannot influence monetary policy. You cannot influence interest rates, inflation. So you're basically depending on a foreign country to kind of do as they please, and it's not. It's kind of difficult to be a dependent country in monetary terms.
I don't suppose the Federal Reserve gives much thought to El Salvador when they make policy changes, do they?
I'm sure they don't.
No, I'm sure they don't. So, I mean, I don't suppose it was even the Federal Reserve's or America's decision to put El Salvador on the dollar. That was probably their decision as the best choice of currency after their own one collapsed, I suppose. And maybe that's what they feel about
Yeah,
Bitcoin now. Is it's another way of hedging their national currency in something that they perceive as stable anyway, politically.
well, politically, yes. Like Bitcoin, maybe not everyone will be using it for to pay a cup of coffee, but it's a great hedge for one country to have, and a great option for their citizens. It's a great way to send remittances and to kind of have it as a store of value, especially since it's deflationary compared to dollar, which is quite inflationary. So in the long term, people have a reason to bet on Bitcoin that its value will grow. So I think it's very important that the countries do have this hedge, do have this option, their citizens.
Well, you mentioned the buying the coffee thing there, right? And people on Twitter were saying, well, how is this possible for it to be legal tender, how on earth are people going to spend it? So, are you familiar with Strike Pay?
I've heard of it.
Yeah, so it's a payment provider that uses the Lightning Network for, for these micropayments. And it's Jack Mullers, I think, is the CEO. He's only a young guy, he's only in his 20s. And he was the one that announced at Miami Bitcoin 2020 conference that he would been speaking to the president of El Salvador and kind of kicked this whole thing off. So when people are like, well, Bitcoin fees and you can't transact in it, blah, blah, well, the whole thing is going to be enabled by Strike Pay, which you can
Lightning.
with Lightning, but from a Strike Pay, it's kind of like PayPal, but using the Lightning Network. And what that means is you can transact in your local fiat currency. So I can send, pounds and you can receive euros, but it goes over the Lightning Network and Bitcoin's powering it in the middle. But as far as the user is concerned, they don't have to care. Now you can have it in Bitcoin as well, but it means people can transact in Satoshis without the fees and because of the Lightning Network. So if people are wondering how on earth is El Salvador with small transaction sizes going to pull this off using Bitcoin, that's the answer, right? Strike Pay and the Lightning Network, right? Tiny fees. So back to the geopolitical point though. So monetary policy, it's not clear in the US and it's also not consistent. That's why it's difficult to plan when you don't have certainty about the future, right? You can't plan because you don't know what's going to happen. And this is what's created the short-termism in, say, the US stock market, is everyone's waiting around. They're only really planning 3 months ahead because you don't know when the next Fed policy meeting is going to be, what the currency creation is going to be, what the interest rate is going to be, what bonds are going to be doing, all this kind of thing. So I think that's turned, this is a whole bigger point, but that's turned the world into short-term thinkers because you just don't know what's going to happen in the long term if that global reserve currency is only being planned on a per quarter basis. You got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, Bitcoin, unlike the fiat currencies, it has a predictable monetary policy, and it's basically coded into its algorithm, and everyone knows it, and it's very predictable. Hence, it also solves other problems of money, like costliness and durability and compactness and validation issues and transportability of money. There's many things that Bitcoin solves and why it's better. And as Nick Szabo has said during the Miami conference, being a good money is intrinsic value in itself.
Yeah.
You don't really need much more than that. If you are good money in all these, you have all these features that fiat does not have, or precious metals did not have, then it's worth giving it a try.
Absolutely. Okay, good point on the transportability thing. So I've written some other notes about El Salvador is quite a small country. I think its population is something like 10 million people, which isn't very large at all. But the neutral politics of Bitcoin in that the monetary policy is super transparent, and it's just a monetary network. With government politics, the policies are for everything, laws and all that sort of stuff. It's not just money. We're separating money out from that into the Bitcoin network and just having a policy that's transparent for the money system that's completely separate. Then you can vote on other things to do with society at the government level, right? So extending that to other world powers, there was a news story that came out from the Russian finance minister this week, it was, basically saying that the National Wellbeing Fund will be completely divesting their $40 billion exposure of assets that are based in US dollars. And the plan is to move more into Chinese yuan and euros and purchasing gold, right? So I'm going to pick up the gold point. So Russia's obviously not happy with having the world reserve currency as the dollar and having an exposure to that with their national sovereign funds. So they're acquiring other large currencies like yuan and euros, but also gold. So the total fund size is $120 billion, it says, and the dollar-denominated allocation is 35% of it, so 40%. So $40 billion out of the $120 billion. The question is, if they're going to acquire gold, how exactly are they going to pull that off? they can either buy a like a derivative, like a paper-based gold contract, futures, ETFs, that kind of stuff, or they can buy the physical gold. And that's where I'm getting to. You made the point about Bitcoin solving the transportability problem. And if Russia decides to buy, or anyone, the Chinese have been buying loads and loads of physical gold over the last few years, and they're taking physical delivery of it to hold it inside the borders of the Chinese country. So obviously it's incredibly expensive, right? Which would create an incentive to buy a gold derived asset like an ETF, which is cheaper, transaction fees are lower, you don't have to transport it, you don't have to store it, and all the rest of it. And this is why I'm wondering if it's probably because of the size of the country, while El Salvador is nimbler, let's call it, they're able to do these kinds of things because there's less at stake. But I just wonder whether there's been any conversation inside the monetary policy committees of the Russias of the world or the Chinese, probably not, as to whether they want to hold some Bitcoin in their national reserves. You got any thoughts on all that sort of stuff?
Well, I would like to know that as well. There probably were some talks behind the closed doors around this issue. Well, Bitcoin would be a great reserve, great for reserves, because it has auditability.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, it's more auditable than gold, and especially if you want to build trust among your citizens regarding or the world regarding the printing of money and how much you have in the reserves, simply by having the address of Bitcoin made public, where the country holds its reserves in Bitcoin, it would be auditable by anyone. Unlike gold, which is not auditable by me or you, no one is going to let us enter their walls and kind of
so you don't really know, do we? That's a very good point.
Yeah.
You can well, you can see. Yeah, how would you really know? You have to rely on the word of the British, Chinese, American, or Russian governments to say how much gold they're holding, but you can't really verify it without going in. I mean, where are they storing it? I don't know. There's a lot of gold in the Bank of England that doesn't belong to us, for example. But you're not just allowed to waltz in there and demand, that they tell you exactly whose is what and where is it and so on. You don't actually know. You don't have physical access to it. But that actually is leading me on to a question which you kind of half started to answer, which is, let's flip the question the other way around. Why wouldn't, Russia, China, the UK, or Serbia switch some of their reserves to Bitcoin? Why wouldn't they? Why would they hesitate to do that? Perhaps the point you made about the auditability is a downside from their point of view, because then they can't play geopolitical games by bluffing as to how much gold they're holding, or, you know what I'm saying? Does that make any sense to you? Why would they hesitate to hold Bitcoin in a national reserve?
Well, it's a difficult question because, we know that the central banks are afraid of Bitcoin and they're against Bitcoin, as we've seen now from the Basel Committee's latest proposal. They consider Bitcoin as the highest risk asset in the world.
Oh, do they?
And yeah.
Okay, that's interesting.
They just said that they want, on Thursday, they said that they want to, they will require basically from banks to hold $1 in as a collateral, as a reserve for each dollar of Bitcoin that they hold in their custody. So it's a huge capital requirement. It's very, very capital intensive, and I don't think banks would want to kind of do custody for Bitcoins and hold Bitcoins on their balance due to these requirements.
That is fascinating.
And they also said that stable coins are on pair with bonds. And so basically, Basel Committee is a central bank of central banks, and it's an international group of. It's governed by governors of 10 countries, central banks of 10 countries. So, like UK, like US, like Russia, like China, Switzerland. So, the largest. The central banks of the largest countries and the most important countries have spoken about that. So we know they're against Bitcoin, and that there's nothing we can do about it, or anyone can do. They will fight.
When you say they consider it the highest risk asset in the world, what do they think the risk is? Do they think the Bitcoin network is going to collapse, disappear, go to zero? What do they think is the risk?
I haven't, because it just came out. I haven't read the whole proposal, so I'm not sure what is their rationale against it. But it's because of usually their rationale against it is that it's volatile, that it's it can be controlled, it can be like everything which we value as
a feature.
as a feature. They see it as
like a disadvantage, right?
Disadvantage.
Okay, it's interesting. So it is the loss of value that they're worried about as far as the risk goes.
In part, yeah. Okay. Well, mostly as a reaction to some other events that may happen. They think, maybe it can get hacked, maybe something can happen, and it's risky for investors. It's risky because everything which we consider valuable, like being your own bank by holding your own private keys as an access to your Bitcoins, they considered it as a disadvantage, and they say it's a disadvantage because it's risky then. It's risky for people to hold their own value instead of giving it to banks. They want to kind of protect the banks.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, and they say consumers as well.
Cryptocurrencies and are replacing the banks. The centralized applications and the centralized finance is definitely will be one day replacing banks.
Yeah, and that is the existing banking system, and the regulators see it as their purpose in life to protect consumers from, themselves ultimately. Because the problem is, and I don't blame central bankers and Bitcoin skeptics for seeing those features as bugs, because it does take an enormous amount of time to dig down into the rabbit hole and really get to the detail of how it works and then understand the whole system and all the details. And only when you've done that can you then speak with authority on it. And these are busy people. They've got a dozen different agendas going on at the same time. And I very much doubt any of them have gone to the lengths that you or I have gone to understand it. So when they are making judgments about it, it's not based on a fully informed, understanding of it, right? Go on, say what you want to say.
I think a lot of them do understand how.
You think they've got a deep understanding?
Not all of them, of course, but I think it's the understanding that it's going to replace the banks. That's what drives the fear.
Oh, so you think they know it? Okay. Do you think they know that
they're
is
just
a risk?
Simply trying to protect the status quo.
Right. So the truth is it's self-preservation, but they can't say that. So they have to tell a different story, like protecting consumers, or what do they say? Bitcoin is a systemic risk to the financial system and things like this. But again, we see that as a positive, as in replacing it with a superior system. But they flip that over and say, well, that's bad because they're trying to protect the existing system. That makes sense from their point of view because they're inside it, and that's their livelihood, and their whole the whole career is based in that, I suppose. So that is political as well. I mean, you tend to think of politics as just governments, but they call it office politics, don't they? Even within a company, you have a social dynamic of people playing power games and whatever. So everyone's got their own agenda and is using their own incentives to get whatever it is they want. And I think that is what really got me interested in Bitcoin. Is it stopped? It doesn't take the position of trying to force anyone to do anything, right? It doesn't push back against anybody. It simply
Exactly. That's
creates
correct.
right. So it simply creates a set of incentives that says if you do this or behave in this way, you benefit. And if you don't want to behave that way, just don't join the network in the first place. That's it. There's no don't do that. It's like join and behave this way and benefit, or just don't join, right?
Hmm.
And I thought that is brilliant because then it's there's no stress. There's no stress really. You're
Hmm.
either in it because you want to be in it or not. And if you're in it, you follow the rules and you benefit, and everyone benefits. So it's the first system I ever came across where everyone is kind of behaving themselves, if you like, because they want to, because it's more profitable to do that than, I
Hmm.
dare say, in the old system, there's an incentive to cheat for personal gain. Whereas in Bitcoin,
Exactly.
it doesn't pay to cheat. It's actually more profitable not to cheat, which was
Yes.
completely mind blowing to me. So that actually brings me back to the geopolitical level that I do see the like those Russian dolls where you get a big one that's got a smaller one inside it's got a smaller one inside. I call them Russian dolls, whatever they're called. And I kind of see the world like that. Whenever I see a concept like don't spend more than you earn, well, that's something that I should practice on an individual level. Don't spend more than I earn. But then I blow it up to a company level and I say, well,
Mhm.
don't if a company shouldn't spend more than they earn, and then I blow it up to like a government level. But governments spend more than they earn. If a government were a person, it would be terrible at financial management because it's constantly
Exactly.
spending more than it earns. And I'm like, but if it doesn't make sense on my individual level, why does it make sense on a government level, right? So similarly, if you and I, have politics and you don't like the same football team as me or whatever, that kind not football, but the same kind of power games and politics happens at the country level. So if China was a person and Britain was a person and America was a person, and we sort of do that, you have all the representatives at the G20, one per country sit around the table and represent the country, and they still do the same old power games, don't they? But why Bitcoin is relevant to that conversation is for the same reason. It sort of gives everyone the option, invites them to this other system where everyone can appeal to their own self interest. And then you don't have to sort of debate it anymore or play power games because everyone can win. That's my point of view about it. And ultimately, why I personally think eventually the El Salvador is the first domino it's going to take a while, a long line of dominoes that will lead to more countries, adopting the Bitcoin standard.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And the game theory aspect of
Mm,
Bitcoin is very, very interesting, and the behavioral economics of
yes.
Bitcoin also. And it's in everyone's interest to protect Bitcoin. Um, that's very, very important. Even the investors who hold Bitcoin, it's in their interest to protect Bitcoin, even though they're not mining, or they're not, maybe they don't have a node running and things like that. But the social influence which anyone who is a shareholder in some way in Bitcoin
Right.
is also extremely important, because um, everyone around the world who's interested in Bitcoin can influence the governance
Right.
in some way.
Sure.
Like we could fork it or do something if you don't agree on things how they are. Um, so that's very important that these game theories have been set right from the beginning. And
Sure.
it's amazing from anthropological and political and governance point of view. So I think many um, walks of jobs and scholars one day will be interested, as they're starting to get interest into how the Bitcoin works, and they will be doing more of their papers on this subject, and it's quite interesting.
That was a brilliant point. So I'm going to pick that up there. If people keep investing in Bitcoin and causing the price to rise, that is like a continuous approval and validation of its monetary policy. Let me dig into that a bit more. If people continue to acquire Bitcoin over time, and more and more people jump on the bandwagon, I think Anthony Pompliano said something like there's 100 million people in the world that hold Bitcoin right now, so plenty of room to go. So if 100 million people have bought into it, that must mean that, each of those individuals, companies or governments, whatever, they go, oh, Bitcoin. They hear about it, they look into it, and they find out what the basic monetary policy is. It's this digital currency that's decentralized. It has a 21 million coin supply maximum. Based, the thing that everyone knows about Bitcoin. It's got this halvening thing, the mining, the da. And you get the basic understanding of it, and you go, okay, I'm in, right? I'll have some of that. And then each one of those 100 million people read the same story. It was created by someone anonymous. There's a 21 million coin supply. It gets mined. It's on the internet. It's incorruptible. And then the second person out of those 100 million said, oh, I like that. I'll have some of that. And then that happened 100 million times. Every one of those people said, oh, yeah, I like it. Right? I like the maximum 21 million supply. I like all that. And that must mean that the design of Bitcoin is almost like universally appealing. Well, not universally, because it would mean all 8 billion people would have to approve of that monetary policy. But so far, so good. 100 million people have approved of that monetary policy. And if that continues, and if, as long as, like you say, as long as it continues to, the technology improves and it gets easier to use and that sort of thing, if ever that monetary policy were to change in such a way that the community disapproved of it, that would unravel. And that 100 million people holding Bitcoin would become 90 million, then 80 million, and the price would start, right? Because people would start offloading it because they don't like it anymore. So it is really a way of voting with your money in a very direct way. So that is governance, I suppose. Governance by the pound, the dollar, and the euro that you invest in Bitcoin or not. So yeah, I never really thought about it like that.
Yeah, it can be kind of direct and indirect governance, as in maybe opinion maker, as some small person on Twitter, or a larger and influential opinion maker. But also, it's very important to note that Bitcoin is the financial censorship with Bitcoin is not non-existent, and it's very important to understand that for these countries it would be helpful to have it as a legal tender, especially since it's kind of protected from black swan events and even protected from the internet itself. And we even have satellites like Blockstream satellites, nodes in space, things like that. So people, companies, individuals, they are making sure increasingly to keep it safe. Either nodes or mining farms, like we have now in El Salvador. We're going to have a mining farm on top of a volcano to use the clean geothermal energy. So all these crazy things are happening. All these companies have invested so much, and there are shareholders, and there are people who are mining it in their basements, and it's not really possible, even with all the China food and the Chinese trying to crack down on mining. I don't think it matters much on the grand scale, because the centralized popularity is really large.
That was another good point. I'm going to take that one as well. So you talk about the decentralization, and some people who have got fear around holding Bitcoin, or say, well, there are large companies in control of the internet. So what do we do about that? Well, you just reminded me of something, which is, so you take El Salvador, geothermal electricity supply from the volcanic energy and the heat. So they can mine the Bitcoin on site, and then with the satellites, or if you were mining Bitcoin and you solved the block, well, you could broadcast the nonce, as it's called. You could broadcast that over radio frequency if you must. If you had no other, right, if you had no internet, etc., no mobile phone signal, you could broadcast that signal 100 miles using a CB radio, just with old pulse tones, like from Morse code days. You could transmit the nonce, because all of the hard work is done by the hardware on a local level. All you need to broadcast is that what you found the nonce, and then everyone can validate it elsewhere. So disintermediating the internet and using all communication methods, telephones, satellites, CB radio, that means that you can bypass any and all censorship of the communication channels. Black swan events, exactly.
And Black swan events, censorship, and global turmoils, some political or I don't know, collapse of
Exactly.
whatever.
Natural disasters, any of that.
Yeah.
The Bitcoin network is so resilient that, but even then, that is another reason for not. And when I talk about the Bitcoin standard, even El Salvador isn't just going to transform their entire economy into Bitcoin only. There's still going to be a dollar denominated economy, and they're just going to introduce Bitcoin as an alternative, right? And that's just like a hedge. And that's just like what we do on an individual level is I don't hold all my savings in Great British pounds. I have half of it in Bitcoin and half of it in Great British pounds. That's a hedge in case, who knows, the Bitcoin price goes down or whatever. Bank of England collapses, don't know. Doesn't matter. It's a principle that you hedge your risk in two different systems, old financial system, new financial system. So countries could take that straddling approach as well, just for their own sake, you know.
Bitcoin is like, I would call it a social contract.
A social contract, okay.
Something like that, yeah. It's like a global social contract which was not imposed by anyone. It was gladly accepted,
Yes.
started being gladly accepted by people. And that's why I think it's a form of some huge global contract, which started as an experiment, but it's kind of outgrowing that experiment phase, and it's becoming something very beautiful.
And everyone signed that social contract voluntarily, and they can withdraw at any time.
Exactly. That's what's important.
That's gobsmacking, isn't it? Is that gobsmacking?
It's not binding.
It's not binding at all. You just click a button, sell your Bitcoin, you're done, right? So on the point of the UK, I was thinking about my country and, well, why don't we adopt the Bitcoin standard? The problem with the UK is the same as the US. Pound sterling is one of the world's reserve currencies. So it's kind of really, really hard to give up the benefits of having that kind of power, right? If the Bank of England be able to create one of the top 5 reserve currencies in the world, and it actually doesn't make sense, if you like, from their point of view, to adopt the Bitcoin standard when you're already in that kind of position of power. For someone like El Salvador, doesn't really have a lot of power or their own currency. They're like, hey, YOLO, you know.
Yes. Well, yeah, they fought for centuries, these large powers. They fought for centuries to create these currencies and impose them on the rest of the world. And you cannot just come and say, hey, but we want something new. What? We fought for centuries to keep this, to conquer the world with our currency and things like that. I wouldn't expect large powers to accept Bitcoin as legal tender, or maybe even not even smaller countries that have their own currency and they're not in war or something. But for the countries which are like El Salvador, they do not have their own they do not have their own currency. It's quite likely that they may accept Bitcoin as a legal tender. Like now we have all these Latin American countries signaling, their politicians are signaling that they are interested and they would like to see Bitcoin accepted as a legal tender, like Argentina or Paraguay or Brazil. But as I said, I think all this has to go through legislatory body and I don't know, Senate and government, and it probably won't be that easy like in El Salvador, and especially if they have their own currency, national currency, which is not foreign currency like El Salvador had dollar.
Sure, that is probably a good place to end. And the next thing for us to keep an eye on is, now that El Salvador has come on board, looking at all the other South American countries and looking to El Salvador as an example, especially if El Salvador succeeds, whatever that means, if they grow their GDP, if it starts to work for them, then that will be, it's then scientific. It's not a risk so much anymore for Panama or Mexico to start considering it, because El Salvador have already gone through the door and they didn't get shot. So, you know that thing, the first through the door gets shot. So if it starts to work for them, it's much lower risk for other South American countries to follow, and then maybe the bigger countries come behind that, maybe not. But in the next phase, I agree with you that other similar countries can then use that as a template potentially.
I think what you said is very important to note, and this is kind of probably the largest monetary experiment in economic experiment in the world. having the whole country accept
Sure.
Bitcoin as a national currency, and that's quite amazing, and as a legal tender. And I can't wait to see what will happen with that. I do expect that their government will kind of go through tough times from the U.S. government, since they kind of, as President Bukele said, hinted that there are already and there will be pressures from large powers regarding his decision, but he is very determined to take it till the end.
I can imagine.
So let's see what kind of political turmoil may happen because of this. I hope it won't, but it's not just the Bitcoin being an experiment, it's also a political experiment for the government. What can happen to that government if they decide to accept Bitcoin?
I totally agree with you. It would be difficult enough if it were just a case of adopting Bitcoin without all of the geopolitical pressure from the United States, for example, not wanting to challenge the dollar. And that's one of the first things that I thought. I thought, well, this guy, Bukele, the president of El Salvador, I'm like, I do not envy his position. While all the Bitcoin community are running around partying and celebrating, he's the one that's going to have, a spine of steel to keep his course. Because behind closed doors, I can't even imagine the types of phone calls he's going to get and kind of decisions he's going to have to make to stay the course. Because he must have a strong back is all I can say, strong spine. Yeah. So hopefully he'll stand his ground. So we'll see.
Yeah, that will be interesting.
All right, Miria, thanks very much for joining us today. This was a great conversation. You got any closing words?
No, I think it's a great day for Bitcoin, great week for Bitcoin, and the amazing thing has happened. Let's see how it's going to go from here. And I'm quite excited about it. Even these, crackdowns of mining, change of legislations here and there, accepting it and don't accepting, banning or unbanning cryptocurrencies. It's kind of it's all going to pass. But so. This is one of the things which is more important. Let's see how it functions when it happens.
Right. Good one. Well, we'll
be here. It actually happens somewhere.
Absolutely. Well, we'll be here to cover it, won't we? So that's all for this week's edition of the Wise Crypto Sunday Special with me, your host, Chris Coney, and Miria. Check your inbox for the next edition of the Sunday Special. Until then, it's me, Chris Coney, saying bye for now.